Good afternoon. So I'm guessing that a few of you have already noticed there is a new purchase and sale agreement in town. So every couple of years, our board revises and reviews our purchase and sale agreement, listing agreement, and accompanying documents, Addenda. This year, we don't have any major changes to our documents, which is a nice thing, but we have moved some things around in the purchase and sale agreement and the listing agreement. Now, the purchase and sale agreement and accompanying addenda on the buyer side have been released today, the 21st of May. We're looking to have the listing agreement and other accompanying addenda probably released within the next week, so we'll have another video for that. I'm going to go through and summarize some of the changes that took place in the purchase and sale agreement. If you would like greater detail on this, Jeff Marks has gone through and done a page-by-page review of the purchase and sale agreement. It's a great refresher if you haven't had a chance, or please feel free to come to our Operational Excellence class, which is held 4 days, and we go over the purchase and sale agreement and listing agreement. So you can come to that at any time. You can pop in and pop out, unless you haven't had the class. So I wanted to go through a couple of things. Again, no major changes, just moving some things around. Kind of wanted to make you aware. Please remember that this is a purchase and sale agreement for the Northeast Florida Association of Realtors. It is copyrighted. Therefore, it's not to be used with for sale by owners or to be handed out. Good thing is, in the first few lines here, no real major changes. Just a reminder though, you want to use the legal name of your buyers, and you may want to, if you're writing an offer, make a phone call to the listing associate to get the proper name or names for the seller, because we know that sometimes the tax record isn't always accurate or correct. Please don't forget to identify the marital status. That has been placed into bold because it is so important. So you identify the marital status. Husband and wife will work. Married couple will work. Single is probably the other one that will work best. So just think about who you're working with and how they want their name to appear on their deed or how it does appear on their driver's license. So the first real change comes in around the lines 16 through 23. This item, the seller hereby represents that the seller has the legal authority and capacity to convey the property. This was moved from a later paragraph. It's not new. It was just moved from around paragraph 13 up to paragraph 1 or prior to paragraph 1. So confirming that this is the individual that has the rights to sell the property. Next, we go into the purchase price descriptor. You'll notice that in paragraph A deals with your initial binder. Previously, there were two boxes. You could check that the initial binder was going to be given at the time the offer was written, or herewith, or that it was coming a certain number of days after acceptance. We put it all into one paragraph, so it basically reads the binder deposit is paid herewith, or is due within a certain number of days. You don't have to check a box. You just identify how the binder is going to be paid, the initial binder. Remember, the buyer does have an opportunity to break their binder up into multiple deposits. So if they don't give a deposit or their initial deposit doesn't come until after acceptance, you would use the blank to fill in the number of days. Otherwise, which is a good habit, to have them put some money down at the time they're writing the offer to show their interest, that would be money herewith. So that's a slight change there. Those boxes have been removed and you just choose by filling in the blank whether or not they're paying the deposit herewith. On item D, it has been identified that if a seller is providing financing, the seller financing addendum is required. That was not there previously. The items for the binder, where the binder is located, are still the same. Please don't forget to fill that out. You should never have TBD in there. If you're unsure of where the binder is going to be held because it's not being held with Coldwell Banker Vanguard, recommend you call the listing associate to find out where they would like to have it. Under the financing, it's been moved around a little bit just to make it more clear. So the loan is marked below with financing contingency. So now it's a little clearer that if there is a loan, it's marked with this financing contingency, and mark only one box. When it says mark only one box, please mark only one box. So either it is conditioned upon the closing of the sale of other real property owned by the buyer, or it is not. So which box is appropriate to your buyer's situation? Make sure you make that selection appropriately. And again, the only change there was that it was broken out for clarity. Scrolling on down, and this says draft because we got this a few days early and prepared this for our presentation thinking that it wasn't coming out till next week, but your forms in MLS don't say draft. Under the conventional, I do want to mention, in case you weren't aware, the appraisal contingency, which is really the main essence of paragraph 2, that expires on conventional and USDA financing. It expires in connection with the loan approval period, but you may remember that if a buyer doesn't have their financing by the date identified for the loan approval period, there was a 5-day window for them to make the request to extend the loan approval period. That 5-day window no longer exists. So the loan approval period ends, that's when the buyer has the time frame to get their loan approval, and if they don't, prior to the end of that period would be when you would need to request an extension. And please remember that on FHA and VA financing, the appraisal contingency does not expire. On conventional, it does expire. So conventional and USDA, the appraisal contingency does expire in connection with the loan approval period. If you've got an extended closing, that's when you need to make sure that those timelines are accurate. Scrolling on down to the loan approval period, I think everybody's going to like this. The traditional loan approval period or the time frame for loan approval was 45 days. We've now backed that down to 30. So again, talk to your buyer's lender. We know that things are changing a little bit when it comes to lenders. Talk to your buyer's lender, find out what's appropriate before completing this so that you don't have to request additional time frames. But it has been identified as the loan approval period being 30 days, which is terrific. And the buyer may terminate this agreement by written notice to the seller within the loan approval period or be deemed to have waived the financing contingency. Really important to remember this. The buyer may terminate it during the loan approval period, and if they don't, and prior to the end of that loan approval period, you do not request an extension, they are moving forward and the loan approval period contingency or the loan approval contingency is automatically removed. So think about that as you're putting this together. Paragraph 3 is now maintenance, inspections, and repairs. So this used to be paragraph 14. We've moved paragraph 14 all the way up to paragraph 3. Why? Well, there's a lot of time frames that we want to make sure that we're in tune with, and this is one of the key time frames. So what we've done is move that up in the purchase and sale agreement so that as you're reading through the purchase and sale agreement, you can evaluate the time periods that you're completing and put them down on your timeline so that you're assured as to when things are supposed to be done. If you go through maintenance and inspection repairs, just some content changes, word changes. So here, within a certain number of days, it's still 10 days if left blank. It can be longer, can be shorter, depending on the situation. The buyer may, and we've added, but is not required to. So in bold, but is not required to. So a buyer, again, does not have to have inspections if they don't want to. Remember, the inspection period is their time to evaluate, but at their sole discretion, they can move away from the contract without penalty, or without penalty as long as all parties agree, and get their binder back. But it's the buyer, if they would like to, but is not required to have inspections, they may. Foundation was added to one of the items that a buyer should check during the inspection period. And if we scroll on down, we can see that we can terminate this agreement by delivering a written notice of termination to the seller. We removed that statement that says you must have more than just the release of binder. So you can go ahead and in an email now, go ahead and request the release of contract. To get a binder back, you do have to have the release of binder and mutual agreement of cancellation, but you can terminate within that period with just an email and then provide that additional document. There's nothing else that you need to do, or you can just send over that cancellation of contract. You no longer have to have anything with it. So before you had to have that document and an email, now you can just have that document and send it over. Okay, moving on down. So moving on down, buyer's responsibility, the repairs and replacements. So notice in here, we've got the removal of the broker notice of liability and the hold harmless. So it's covered later in this document. So that's great. So it's just a minor change there, a removal. Under title evidence, what we've got, the syntax is kind of changed for clarification. So we've added, wherever it says survey, we've added it to say survey map. And then within the title, it's a clarification item. Within the survey section, notice it is at the seller's expense. So A new stake survey is most times what's requested, unless it's required differently by the lender. So a new stake survey, or you can get a copy of a survey. Usually the lender doesn't like it to be more than 3 to 5 years old. If you've got something that's built more than 3 to 5 years ago, I'd probably request a new stake survey. But if a copy is requested and then the lender requests a new one, they will not accept the copy, then it's the responsibility of the seller, and that's laid out here. They will also refer back to the paragraphs related to the buyer and the seller expense to see who's supposed to pay it if it's different from here. Notice it's now paragraph 7 on the seller expenses. Title examination of closing, really nothing different here. You have 3 choices. Please check only one, either a certain number of days after loan approval, probably the most common, on a specific date. Again, this is where we find a lot of errors. If you do put a specific date, make sure your time frames work within that date. And then certain number of days after acceptance, most commonly used, of course, in cash. Moving on down, extension of closing, we've added and other dates. So automatic extension of closing and other dates. We've added government shutdown. Gosh, I wonder why. So we've added government shutdown to this paragraph as an item that would automatically extend the time for closing. Other additions would include your condominium or homeowners association rules and regulations. So again, this could potentially extend the closing, and even if not yet a monetary obligation. So this is all related to how we would extend or when there would be an extension of the date of closing or other specific dates. So here, nothing major, just some additional verbiage changes, or additions, excuse me. The buyer and seller costs were in paragraphs 8 and 9. They've been moved back to paragraphs 7 and 8. No major changes in here at all on the buyer side. However, on the seller side, we have added 1-year home warranty not to exceed. So the expense would not be higher than whatever the seller is agreeing to here for a 1-year home warranty if the seller is paying for a 1-year home warranty. Remember, if the seller already gets, or you're working on the listing, and the seller has elected to have seller's coverage, which is roughly $60, $60 or $70, depending on the home warranty company, then you may have already worked out which product or which home warranty product you'll be providing, or the seller will be providing. Moving on down, still under the seller, I'd like to remind people that the seller is only obligated to pay those items that are marked in paragraph 7 in this case. So make sure that if you're negotiating the seller to pay for some of the buyer's expenses, you've marked those in the buyer expenses. So we've added PACE to the seller items as something that must be resolved prior to closing. So if the property presently has PACE financing, the buyer and the seller must sign the PACE addendum, which addendum shall be a part of this agreement. It's the other thing to note. Anything that's a part of this agreement must be signed by all parties before the entire agreement is considered a contract. As we move on down, if neither box is marked, the seller shall pay such assessment. So if there are assessments, remember in the previous, you could say that the buyer would pay or the seller would pay. So above here, we are identifying who's going to pay it. And here we say, if neither box is marked, the seller shall pay. So it's no longer, it's assumed that the seller will cover that expense if the box for the buyer or neither box is checked. Moving on down to default. So within default, in other words, the bad thing where not everybody does what they're supposed to do, including failure to pay all binder deposits. Please remember that when a buyer makes a commitment for a binder deposit, whether it's in one or multiple deposits, they are responsible for the initial deposit and any other deposits agreed to be made if they default. So we've clarified that by saying including failure to pay all binder deposits within the time specified. So not only if they default are they responsible for the committed amount, whether it's been paid or not, but if they fail to make a deposit in a timely manner, that is now considered, or that has always been considered, a default, but we've laid that out a little more clearly. And all loan and sale processing and closing costs incurred, whether the same were to be paid by the buyer or the seller, will be the responsibility of the seller. This is if the seller defaults, so we've clarified that. The seller would be paying those expenses. Non-default of and payment of expenses, no changes there. Scrolling on down, property disclosure, we've removed the mole disclosure. The removal of the seller affirmation for the rightful property was moved to the beginning, and we've moved the we've removed the bad drywall. So moving on down, and again, these are all disclosures that we're required to make. Community Development District, this one's been clarified a little bit. If the property is, you need that you need that disclosure, you need that addendum. Possession, no changes here. Remember, when are they getting in possession? Either at the time of closing or after the time of closing. And if it is before or after, please have either the title company attorney or another attorney create a document that both parties can sign. Casualty, loss, or damage, what we can see here, casualty, loss, or damage, this paragraph's been moved from paragraph 6 to paragraph 15, so no major changes in it. It's just been moved for better flow. Under personal property, we've added a few things. So we've added trash compactor under personal property, moved it up. We've also added the smart outlets, thermostats, keyless entry devices. So those would automatically convey, and it's the responsibility of the seller to go ahead and grant access to the buyer. We've added security camera or cameras. If they're staying, remember, if these are not staying, if they're installed and not staying, please identify them as items that will not be staying or will not convey. Other smart home devices, we've given you the opportunity to identify any other smart home devices that will be staying on the property that your seller is leaving. So talk to your sellers about that, make sure you're aware. If you can, make sure that you remember to let them know that if there is solely video, then we just have to have something near the front door that says there are cameras for security purposes only. If it's audio and video, we're supposed to have anyone coming through the door acknowledge that there is audio and video recording occurring. That's and occurring, both of those. We've delineated the community development district that was missed before, so we added it more to be specific. Notice this line here, kind of touched on it, and this agreement will not be deemed accepted unless and until all marked addenda, riders, and disclosures have been signed and initialed as appropriate by both buyer and seller and delivered to the buyer and the seller or their respective broker. We added this because it needs to be clear to everybody that whenever you have any of these addenda that are identified as part of the contract, those all must be executed appropriately by buyer and seller in order for you to have a contract. So if your offer is accepted in its presentation or in its format, but you've identified the condo rider, that condo rider must be signed by both parties in order for you to have a fully executed contract. So any addenda that you include must be completely executed for you to have a fully executed contract. Executed being signed by both parties. We are still speaking with the lenders, and the lenders are requesting that we don't put in the seller's property disclosure here. Remember, any item listed here or identified here not only must be completely executed, but it goes to all the parties. And those are the aliens that sometimes can cause a slowdown. For example, the underwriter. So we're not putting the seller's disclosure in here. We still recommend, as a listing associate, you get that seller's disclosure filled out, completed, and signed. Many buyers, associates, and buyers are going to request it. So it's always good to have it on hand, but it's not usually or customary to make it a part of the contract at this time. Other additional addenda, those would be things that you would identify. As we move further on down, complete agreement, no changes here. Time is of the essence. Please remember that time is of the essence. So look at your time frames. Any time frame ending on a Saturday, Sunday, or federal holiday moves to the next non-Saturday, Sunday, or federal holiday. So if you went under contract last Friday, last Friday would be what's tomorrow, the 22nd, so the 15th. If you went under contract on the 15th, your 10-day window for inspections actually doesn't end until Tuesday. Would have customarily ended on Sunday, which would move it to Monday, but Monday's a federal holiday, so therefore it moves to Tuesday. So watch that, make sure you're looking at those timelines. Sometimes that can give you a couple extra days. No major changes here. Moving on down, date of acceptance. Once you have all pieces put together, that's the date of acceptance and a fully executed contract. The wire fraud alert has been more clearly defined and set aside in a box. We don't do a lot of wiring because of the liability for our customers and ourselves. So that's just been more refined and defined better. And then below the buyer and the seller sign, of course, you need their marital status here. And then below that, that's the end of the purchase and sale agreement. Notice that's before you sign. So moving on, all of your information is below that. We've gone from 10 pages to 11 pages. So all of the different things that keep bringing this up. So the additional amendment or addendas that will be available, no major changes in those. There is a red line version of this that is available in MLS, and we should have these forms in Forms Drawer and ProWorks, I'm hoping by the end of next week. So I thank you for your time. If you would like a copy of the highlighted version, let me know. You can again get the red line version, but if you have any questions on the changes, ring me up at 904-537-6149 or send me an email for clarification if you need any clarification at cleblond@cbvfl.com. I know this is a long one, so thank you for taking time to go through it. Have a great